Good afternoon and welcome to the third of our Lunch with the League series. Before we start, I would like to make a few announcements. Please remain muted throughout the session. There will be a Q&A session after we hear from our speaker today. So if you have any questions for him, please put them in the chat directed to Kathy Morgan. Finally, I would like to advise you that this session is being recorded, and the link to the recording of each of the sessions will be available on our League website. The link to the website is in the chat. At this time, I'd like to introduce the president of our League, Betsy Patterson, who will make a few remarks.
Hi, I'm Betsy Patterson, president of our local league. The League of Women Voters was founded in 1920, 6 months before the ratification of the 19th Amendment granting women the right to vote nationwide. It was established as a nonpartisan grassroots organization to encourage voters to become active participants in our democracy. The League has many activities, including registering voters, informing them about the issues and the candidates through our voter guides and candidate forums, and getting out the vote during an election. We also educate the public about how our government works. In this series, we will interview Ventura County elected officials to learn what their roles are in the government, what skills are required, and what challenges they face. It is not a candidate forum or a campaign opportunity. It is a chance to educate the public about the work they do in the day-to-day functioning of our county. Thank you for joining us. We hope you gain a better understanding of what our elected officials do in Ventura County in their jobs. And now, I would like to turn the program over to our Voter Services co-chair, Pat Malchek, and I will share the organizational chart for our county.
Thank you, Betsy. We now are going to screen share a chart that shows how our county government is organized. In this series, our intent is to focus on those county officials who are elected, and we will be interviewing them over the course of the next 5 weeks. Although we have multiple county supervisors, for the purpose of this series, we will only be interviewing one of them who will share with us the various aspects of the role of county supervisor. At this time, I have the pleasure to introduce our county district attorney, Erik Nasarenko. Welcome, Attorney Nasarinko, and thank you for joining us today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for allowing me to speak to the League, and nice to see all of you virtually.
Thank you. Okay, District Attorney Erik Nasarenko was appointed district attorney by a 5-0 vote of the Ventura County Board of Supervisors on January 26, 2021. Prior to becoming DA, he has served and protected our county as a prosecutor since 2008, where he secured jury trial convictions against defendants for child molestation, rape, kidnapping, and murder. He also served as the district attorney's representative to Homeless Court, which provided opportunities for rehabilitation and community-based job development. Mr. Nasarenko also served as mayor of Ventura and as a city councilman from 2013 to 2021. As part of his commitment to protecting victims and seeking justice in all our communities, Mr. Nasarenko is expanding the mental health unit and creating additional assistance for victims, including housing for the domestic violence victims and expansion of the Family Justice Center. Thank you for joining us today, and I'm going to begin with a few questions for you, Mr. Nasarenko, and the first one will be, could you please explain to us what the qualifications and prerequisites are that prepare one for the role of district attorney?
I'd be happy to, and thank you, Pat, for the question, and nice to see, again, all of you. You're celebrating an anniversary of sorts, as you just mentioned in your introductory remarks. I was appointed a year ago to the day, January the 26th, 2021. And at that time, the Board of Supervisors and the county sought applicants for the position of district attorney. The applicants needed to be members of the California Bar, that is licensed attorneys. They needed to be in good standing with the California Bar. And in addition, they needed to be voters who resided, obviously, in Ventura County. Curiously, I learned after the appointment that there were 12 applications submitted to the county, and 7 of those applications met the qualifications that I just outlined. So, you know, basically, most of DAs come out of the world of prosecution. And certainly as a prosecutor for 14 years, I am one of them. But I also had that skill set as a city official, a mayor and city council member, and was able to kind of blend both my prosecutorial background as well as my civic leadership in attaining the position. So I hope that adequately addresses the question, Pat.
It does. Thank you. Thank you so much. Second question, how long is your term and are there term limits?
There are not term limits for the office of the district attorney. When I was appointed to fulfill the unexpired term of my predecessor.
Mhm.
So that essentially is a 2-year block from January 2021 to the expiration of the term in January 2023. Interestingly, as a general law county, we default to state law, in this case, the state constitution, which does not authorize term limits for the position of district attorney in a general law county.
Okay. Next question, what is your department's budget and how many employees are in your department?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Our budget is approximately $60 million. And I want to unpack the $60 million for you and the League of Women Voters. About 2/3 of that comes from what's known as the county's general fund. This is the main organ or engine of the county, provided by mostly sales and property tax dollars. It's the same engine that helps parks, roads. So we receive about 2/3 of the $60 million from the county's general fund. We also receive about 13% from what's known as Proposition 172. It was a voter-approved initiative in the early to mid 1990s that was dedicated towards public safety, both law enforcement and prosecution. And then lastly, we receive about 21% from grants. And I want to just highlight a few of those grants because they provide victim advocates for our office. They also provide prosecutors, and in addition, they provide investigators. So we receive, for example, from the state of California, grant funds to have in the Office of District Attorney 2 DUI-based prosecutors who specialize in driving under the influence cases, vehicular manslaughter cases, wherein it is alleged the offender was either impaired by drugs or alcohol. And then we have prosecutors who are funded by the state who deal exclusively with, for example, workers' compensation fraud, employers who may seek to misclassify deliberately employees as independent contractors or who pay in cash and in doing so are committing fraud. We also have, through federal grants, victim advocates who assist victims of crime with support, intervention, and services. That's why I tell people, you know, what happens at the state level is very important, but so too is what happens at the federal level. You know, the Victims Against Violence Act, the Victims of Compensation Act. These are all pieces of federal legislation that actually bring dollars into our county. In terms of our overall staff, we are 296 employees, and 106 of those, or 1/3, are district attorneys, prosecutors. We also have a sworn peace officer section that is the Bureau of Investigations. And then we have victim advocates, whom I've mentioned, and then information technology, paralegals. We have clerical and support staff. So this comprises the 296 employees.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Nasarenko, what are the top 3 priorities or functions of your office?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I mean, number one is making sure the county remains safe. We are the 13th largest county among the 58. And just to give you a sense of the volume that the district attorney's office deals with, we receive on an annual basis approximately 24,000 to 28,000 cases. That's every year. And that runs the whole gamut from, fish and game violations, wherein someone is alleged to have harvested lobster out of season, all the way to murder and manslaughter. So you can imagine that we have a significant volume of cases. Our primary responsibility is to assess those cases, to determine whether or not the elements of crimes have been met. When they are, we file appropriately and fairly, I believe, criminal charges. We also, in some instances, will divert individuals away from the criminal justice system, particularly for low-level offenses. They may be eligible, for example, for judicial diversion. They may be eligible for mental health diversion. So one of our core functions is making sure that when an agency, that is a police agency, it could be the sheriff, it could be the Ventura Police Department, it could be a California law enforcement body, when they bring cases to us, that we evaluate it. If we don't have enough evidence, we oftentimes seek more from that agency, and then we make a call. We make a decision through the office. What charges are we going to file? To what extent are they misdemeanors versus felonies? And then ultimately, what sentence are we going to recommend? Are we going to seek local jail? Are we going to seek diversion? Are we going to seek prison? These are very weighty, important decisions that our office makes. So that's one core obligation and function. And then secondly, I would just share with you, Pat, in the league, that we also have a core duty and responsibility to crime victims. Just over the course of the summer, we were successful, thanks to the Board of Supervisors and the County of Ventura, in purchasing a family justice center. There are 17 counties among California's 58 that have these family justice centers. Ours is directly across from the Ventura County Medical Center here in Ventura. And that's not by accident. I mean, we wanted it to be across from the main trauma facility of the county, so that when someone is injured, when they are hurt, they can immediately begin receiving services. That can be a restraining order. That can be, I need a cell phone. I don't have it anymore. It's in the possession of the alleged abuser. It can also be, as you mentioned in your opening remarks, short-term domestic violence shelter. We will open in the summer of 2022 for the first time in the Family Justice Center's history, a short-term domestic violence facility at the Family Justice Center location. It will accompany approximately 14 individuals in 14 different units for periods of 1 to 15 days. It will accommodate both pets as well as minor children. And the whole notion here is you can't go back to your abuser. You may have reported a crime. How do we break the intergenerational cycle of violence? We have to separate people from the alleged abuser and allow them some space for both emotional healing and psychological healing, but also to just empower them to see that there are other opportunities than going back to the house they just left. So, those are two very core functions: the filing of cases and the protection of victims. And, it's something that we take very seriously and that we'll continue to do on behalf of county residents.
Thank you. And finally, what are the challenges that your department is facing?
Well, this won't surprise you at all. It's a challenge that we're all facing in the world as well as the country in the state of California and here in Ventura County, and that's COVID. Just to give you some insight, for the last couple of weeks, we have basically in part been shut down. What do I mean by that? No jurors have been able to enter the building. We've suspended all jury trials. The majority of my staff are now telecommuting. They're working from home to limit exposure and to limit contact, particularly during this Omicron strain. And you can imagine, with 24,000 to 28,000 cases a year, what that does. One, it just increases the stress level because the cases don't go away. They're still there. They're just now backlogged. And what happens is we operate under a set of emergency orders, which are handed down by the California Supreme Court and implemented in the Ventura County Court and in other courthouses through the presiding judge, because defendants, by virtue of the Constitution, have speedy trial rights. They have to be arraigned or they have to be brought before a judge to plead not guilty or guilty within a certain time period. When a charge is filed, they have certain rights when they're felonies to what's known as a preliminary hearing. So right now, that has all been suspended with the exception of some emergency cases. But nevertheless, when we come out of this, and I'm hoping relatively soon, that puts a lot of pressure on, the public defender, on the courts, and on us. So, that is very much a pressing concern. And then I just want to share with you two others. I talked about it this morning. Just a really disturbing and alarming rise in the number of fentanyl-based cases that we're seeing in Ventura County. And I'm not alone. This is being experienced in other counties as well as throughout the United States. Fentanyl, for those of you who don't know, it is a synthetic opioid. It can be in a pill or it can be in a powder form. It is 50 to 100 times more potent than morphine. It is highly addictive and also incredibly lethal. Let me just kind of put this problem in some stark terms and give you some statistics. So for the pre-pandemic years, just take the 2 years before the pandemic, 2018 and 2019. We had in the office of the district attorney 27 cases involving fentanyl. That could be somebody who's possessing it to use it, or it could be somebody who's possessing it to sell it. So let's now look at the pandemic years of 2020 and 2021, just to give you the contrast. So for the 2 years before, we had 27 fentanyl cases. For the 2 years within the pandemic, we now have 348, a nearly 1,000% increase. And, it is, people can take it one time and die. My obligation as the DA is, one, I have to continue to maintain vigorous prosecution of these cases. We will soon begin admonishing fentanyl drug dealers if they sell fentanyl, and if as a result of that sale, the person they sell to is killed, they can be charged with murder. We want to make sure that deterrent language exists, but there also has to be a significant public health, public messaging, and public education component to this. The behavioral health section of our county has launched a successful awareness program called Fentanyl is Forever, meaning, you take it once, you may not be coming back. And then, we have to also just understand as a society what is going on here. My feeling, and this is just my opinion alone, when you have, greater withdrawal, profound isolation, just more mental health challenges, and the isolation that the pandemic has wrought, not to mention heightened anxiety and sort of just greater polarization, that really can fuel a lot of negative behaviors and habits. And what we're seeing is fentanyl is cheap, it's widely available, and it's now on our streets. And then, an issue that I always want to speak to individuals about, it's mental health. In the intersection of the court system, of homelessness, and of prosecution to mental health. We established this month, in fact, just a couple of weeks ago, the first ever mental health unit in the office of the district attorney. It's now 3 individuals, and one of those individuals is tasked with looking at cases from just a different perspective. And, this in no means will jeopardize, I believe, public safety, because there are going to be certain mental illness cases, certain offenders who are so violent, who suffer from such profound psychosis that they may need to continue to be confined. But this mental health unit, one of the specific prosecutors within it, is tasked with looking at mental health diversion and mental health court, these alternative sentencing courts, and saying what cases are appropriate, which ones can we steer towards treatment and rehabilitation rather than the traditional route of incarceration. Not all cases are going to qualify, not all defendants will be suitable, but it's a new way of looking at these cases, because ultimately I think we all want the same thing. We want to promote public safety by making sure that individuals do not recidivate. And if they just cycle in and out of jail, then you will be in this vicious cycle of recidivism. And if they cycle in and out without treatment, without help, whether that's medication-assisted treatment, whether that's outpatient or psychiatric counseling, whether it's substance use assistance, then they'll continue to reoffend. So, in terms of my priorities, I'm just giving you a sense of some of them. And then, I'll just add one other. We do see more organized retail theft than we have in the past. That's something that my office takes seriously and will continue to prosecute. And I'm working now with Assemblymember Jackie Irwin on a bill that will allow Ventura County to take offenses that happen in other counties and charge them here in Ventura County. Because when you think about it, a theft crew, they're going to multiple counties. They're going to multiple jurisdictions. It just makes more sense for the victim to be able to testify in one county. It also, given what we're dealing with in terms of scarce judicial resources, it also makes more sense to have one judge on these cases. And then lastly, as prosecutors, if it's sufficiently similar, they're stealing the same items, they're using the same modus operandi, it just makes sense to put it into one case under one prosecutor, under one charging document. So, these are some of my top priorities. And I just want to thank you again, Pat, for the questions, and I'm happy to take others.
Wonderful. And thank you very much, District Attorney Nasarenko, for enlightening us, for one thing, and sharing such specific, important information for us. At this time, we're going to open it up to questions from the attendees, and I will turn it over to my co-chair, Kathy Morgan, to facilitate the questions and answer session.
Thank you, Pat, and thank you, Mr. Nasarenko. You've already given us a lot of information, and we certainly appreciate it, but we do have some questions, and so I'll proceed with those. And just to remind anybody, if you do have questions for the district attorney, please put them in the chat directed to Kathy Morgan. Thank you. Our first question, someone says, years ago, I volunteered weekly with victim services. Are volunteers still at work in your office?
They are, with a caveat, actually two. One is COVID. The Family Justice Center is attempting to reach out to victims primarily outside rather than in indoor locations because of Omicron. The answer is yes, we still accept volunteers. Nevertheless, the other caveat is they have to go through a background check. We have to make sure that there are no issues in their background that would possess a conflict. But yes, in some limited situations and circumstances, we continue to rely on the good work and the help of volunteers.
Thank you. I myself am a CASA, and I know that when I attended CASA, an orientation for CASA, they talked about victim services volunteers in your office. That was before the pandemic, but some years back, but good work done by those people. Another question is, there are some crimes progressive district attorneys are not prosecuting. These include shoplifting, trespassing, larceny under $250, robbery if a gun is not loaded, a minor in possession of alcohol, receiving stolen property, and more. How is your department dealing with these crimes?
You know, my position on those crimes, as well as all crimes in general, is look at them on a case-by-case, circumstance-by-circumstance basis. What do I mean by that? I generally don't like kind of blanket policies that impose a ideological lens on all cases, because every case is unique. And what I'm trying to create here in the office of the district attorney is I want everyone to be fair and reasonable, and at the same time to continue to be tough. And what does that look like? When you assess a case, whether it's a trespass or a shoplifting, what is the fair and reasonable outcome? Is this somebody who may suffer from a substance use disorder, maybe young, maybe the stain of a criminal conviction will impact them in terms of employment, college assistance, even housing? I want you to consider that. If this is somebody who continues to reoffend, who uses a firearm, whether loaded or unloaded, in the commission of a crime, that to me is extremely serious. I mean, I want to take a very strong stance on gun violence. So if there's an enhancement that needs to be alleged, that is for the use of a gun, loaded or unloaded, if there is a gang involved, these, I believe, if the facts and circumstances warrant, should be at the discretion of the DA, also alleged and put in the criminal document. So it's really what I consider to be a comprehensive analysis of the offense. What are the victim's interests? What are the societal interests? What was the level of crime? That is, impact to the victim in terms of personal, psychological, or physical harm. What is their history? How old are they? You know, I just think we have an obligation to look at all of these facts and circumstances when we fashion our cases and when we make suggestions in terms of punishment or rehabilitation to the court.
Thank you. Another question here. In addition to the mental health unit, what is your approach to achieving racial equity and social justice in how you administer the law and in the hiring of staff?
Yeah, great question. I'm gonna respond to it in two ways. One, you know, when I came into this job, I remember reading something from our Attorney General, Merrick Garland, who said, you know, our obligation as prosecutors is to see cases in our analysis and in our charging and in the sentences we recommend in a like-for-like posture. What does that mean? You know, we have to make sure and be very conscious and deliberate that when you have two cases that are similar in terms of what they're charged with, what they've done, their criminal history, that it's like for like, that you're not in any way being disproportionate because of race, gender, or other considerations, that really you are treating similarly situated individuals the same way. So that's one thing that I'm very conscious about. And you know, I talk to supervisors and chief deputies about that. That's the management structure. The other thing that I believe very strongly and that I believe we've been able to accomplish and will continue to strive to do is bring in individuals as prosecutors and as investigators who come from communities of color. You know, I didn't mention this at the outset, but I've had the fortune of hiring 13 prosecutors since I've been here for 1 year, 9 of whom are women, and also many of whom are ethnic minorities. We brought in an African-American woman who grew up in Oxnard, a former sworn peace officer with the Oxnard Police Department. She is now part of that mental health unit that I talked about. We brought in somebody from Moore Park who went to Moore Park Community College and then ultimately my alma mater, Loyola. He's the first in his family not only to go to law school, but just to go to college. And he speaks fluent Spanish. He's culturally competent. he can engage with victims and in his caseload in a way, frankly, that somebody who is not familiar with the language and perhaps the culture would do. And then I've also brought in a Korean American from Cook County, Chicago, who came to this country when she was 14. So, you know, why is diversity important? One, I think it helps in a curative way about maybe these implicit and explicit biases, but also I think it informs our decision making. You know, we have the ability to be broad-minded, to think comprehensively about backgrounds, about circumstances, and that's the kind of office I want. I don't want an office that just goes one way all the time. I want an office that looks at the entire case, brings in their life experiences in doing so, and I believe that's where we're going.
Thank you. One of the attendees, I guess, referring to some previous remarks you made, it says, you mentioned the size of the county. Is this an area or size of population?
Oh, great question. It's size of population. Yeah, when I mentioned that we're the 13th in terms of the 58 counties, that's in reference to not geographic size, but total number of residents.
Thank you for that clarification. You mentioned the opening of the new shelter coming up in the summer, and so that certainly seems like an accomplishment for your office. Are there other accomplishments, major accomplishments in your office over the last year that you'd like to mention?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity, Kathy. Parenthetically, we will be opening a victim outreach and intake center in the community of Oxnard. And just to kind of give you the background here, Jackie Irwin, the assembly member, and I spoke shortly after my appointment. We talked about what we needed. I mentioned, can you get me $1 million for Oxnard, which is in her assembly district. She was successful in getting that in the governor's budget. And then, you know, it's interesting. We've been able to capitalize on that 1 million and expand it. What do I mean by that? The county of Ventura, as well as the city of Oxnard, are going to match, if not expand beyond that 1 million. And they're likely going to use perhaps American Rescue Plan, COVID relief money to do so, to help create this victim outreach and intake center in Oxnard. We're actually actively looking at a site right now. We've identified one. And the whole idea here is, you know, in this one, Oxnard, as we all know, is the largest city in the county. It also has a number of undocumented individuals. They may have mistrust about the criminal justice system. They may have mistrust arising from their home countries towards prosecutors and police. And, you know, they too are victims. So we're going to work with MyCop and other nonprofits to reach out to the indigenous and Mixteca communities, also those who are undocumented, because we want to deliver culturally competent services in a language and in culture that encourages them to come forward to seek help and resources. And that's something that I'm excited about. You know, we've identified that site. We've got money coming in, and it started at $1 million, and I believe it's going to be several million by the time it's open.
That sounds very, very exciting. And that goes right into the next question. Someone asked, we are interested in knowing how many different languages you have to be ready to deal with in our county.
Oh gosh, that's a great question. We're 43% of almost 44% Latinx now. So, the most common languages that we see here in terms of our caseload and our victim outreach is Spanish, I would say followed by Filipino, those two. But I know from our cases that we oftentimes have to bring in interpreters and translators in Farsi, in Armenian, in Russian, Portuguese. We have the ability to bring in individuals in those languages on a case-by-case basis. But we're certainly a very diverse county, but the greatest need we see is primarily in Spanish. But also it's worth pointing out that, Mixteca indigenous, you could be from Zapoteca, you could be from another area of Mexico. That in itself is a distinct language. So, we want to make sure that, for example, in this Family Justice Center in Oxnard, that we have people who speak those specific languages and understand the culture and norm of them. That's a challenge. But I think when you have resources in the backyards of those people where they live and they work, that's one way they can access them.
Very good. Someone asks, what is the Part 1 crime rate in Ventura County and how does it compare statewide? And then what about domestic violence? And they specifically ask in the East County.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I actually asked about this, I think Monday this week. Part 1, just for those of you who don't know, the FBI and the federal government require agencies to document certain crimes, among them rape, among them murder, aggravated assault, and arson. And that comes out every year. The short answer to the question is we don't have the Uniform Crime Report Part 1 crime data yet for 2021. It's just not available because I asked, because here we are in January. What we do have, and this was featured a couple days ago in the Ventura County Star, is the homicide figures. We had approximately 20 in 2021. We had the same in 2020. Our homicide rate is nothing like it is in other more urban counties. So and it's interesting to point out, LA, for example, is seeing a dramatic increase, as are other counties, I think Alameda, in homicides. But we're not seeing that here in Ventura County, and I hope that remains the case, because that is one benchmark, obviously, that really kind of just tears apart the civic fabric, and I think is something that all prosecutors always have to be cognizant of.
And the domestic violence?
I had a statistic. I remember it because I just gave it last week. We have about 3,000 domestic violence cases per year. Now, domestic violence is a catch-all phrase. Domestic violence can be the infliction of bodily harm among intimate partners. It can be the violation of a restraining order by spouses. It can be stalking among dating partners. It can be, depending on the context, drawing a gun on somebody in the household who's a family member, a cousin, a grandmother, a loved one. So it is a kind of a large caption for a number of different crimes. I don't have the stats directly at the ready, but I remember when I spoke about this, over the last 4 years, we saw the greatest number of domestic violence cases. I think I want to say, don't quote me, about 3,100 in 2020. And it went down slightly in 2021, and it was less so in 2019. And I think just, I'm speculating, of course, but the reason was, if you think about 2020, that was sort of the initiation of the lockdown or the work closures. So you had a lot of people returning to the household, a lot of togetherness, frankly, among families. And oftentimes that togetherness lends itself to domestic violence and abuse. So we did have a slight decrease in 2021 in terms of our domestic violence cases. It wasn't noticeable or pronounced, but I do recall over the last 4 years, the greatest number of domestic violence cases were in the year 2020.
I know at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a lot of concern that a lot of child abuse would go unreported because kids were not in school. So I suppose if it wasn't reported, you don't have a way of measuring that, but do you have any information on that?
I do not. I just have anecdotally, Kathy, sort of the notion that when we went back to school, that is when some of the in-person learning resumed, we did see an increase in what are known as multidisciplinary interview callouts. So this is just one benchmark. And what do I mean by that? In 2021, we saw an increase in detectives being summoned to child abuse cases for the purpose of conducting that multidisciplinary interview in one of these family justice center settings. So that's just one kind of benchmark that suggests that it may have been repressed, it may have been hidden, but due to the fact that children were back in school where they were in contact with authority figures, teachers, counselors, they now were in a position where they had a neutral third party to disclose the crime to. Because typically, in a child abuse case, one of the most common reporting mechanisms is at the school site. Somebody either sees the abuse or they're told about it. So that's just one kind of way of suggesting perhaps we've seen some repression in 2020 and then people with in-person instruction being able to disclose it again to authority figures for the purpose of these interviews.
Thank you. Someone asked, last I knew, there were 2 domestic violence shelters in the county, one in the east of the county, one in the west. Are they still functioning? And if so, could you please explain why we need the new shelter that you mentioned? Does this new shelter have a special function, or is it justified by the increase in number of domestic violence victims?
I mean, there's such an acute shortage. I mean, in a perfect world, you wouldn't have 14 beds for 2 weeks. You'd have, 14 multiplied exponentially. You can imagine, I mean, just think about 3,000 cases coming in a year. And then, a county like ours, for example, we have, in terms of permanent shelters, 24 beds. I mean, we don't have enough. And, to answer the question most directly, yes, we do have shelters in other locations, but this is strategically located so that when someone comes out of the Ventura County Medical Center, they can find a safe space. It's going to be secure. It's going to be fenced. It will have 24/7 security on site. And, when you're traumatized psychologically, emotionally, physically, you don't really have the capacity at that moment to navigate different services. You just need somewhere right then and there. So, I've got my restraining order. It's been e-filed with the court. I've got emergency assistance. I got a cell phone. I've been given a credit card for food supplies. I just need to go ahead and get my bearings and be in the short-term shelter for the next couple of days. That's what this is really designed to do. So, it's not going to be administered, by the way, by the district attorney's office. I mean, that's not really our direct wheelhouse. It will be administered by the Coalition for Family Harmony, one of our wonderful nonprofits. So, they will be in charge of running it, staffing it, but it's a fantastic site. I was there just a couple of weeks ago. Their former neurological and medical offices, as you can imagine, kind of that area of Ventura, Midtown, had a lot of them. And they're being repurposed right now for beds, in some cases, sinks and showers. And it's exciting. So it's not going to be enough, but it's definitely a step in the right direction.
Absolutely. Yes, I, a few years back, got to tour the Family Justice Center, and it's very impressive to have all those services there together. And at the time, they mentioned that the hope was to build a domestic violence shelter. So I'm glad it moved forward. Another person asked, since you brought up LA, in your opinion, what is happening there? And are you concerned that Ventura will see similar activity?
I'm not. I mean, my philosophy is somewhat different than the LA DA's. I continue, for example, to charge gun enhancements. I continue to charge when the facts and circumstances warrant it, gang allegations. And another just distinct difference is I continue to represent the voice of victims in parole hearings. Our prosecutors will routinely attend on behalf of the victim and on behalf of our office, those parole hearings. So, these are just some distinctions between my office and theirs. The other thing that I will say is we're a safe county, and I believe we will remain as such. We have tremendous partnerships with our law enforcement agencies. We continue to have strong nonprofits, a very robust public education system, good economic growth. So I just feel like the ingredients here are good for public safety. They're good to maintain a safe and healthy county. I just see some very distinct differences between ourselves and our partner to the south.
Thank you. You may know that we have heard from two other elected officials, the county assessor and the sheriff, and both of them told us that the grand jury, I don't want to say investigated, but met with the department each year. Does the grand jury meet with your department to give any oversight, or who does have oversight of the district attorney's office?
Ultimately, the budget is controlled through the Board of Supervisors.
Mm-hmm.
So they are one oversight entity. But the civil grand jury, as you know, is the watchdog function of the county. So they have the ability also to perform oversight and analysis of any department, including ours. In the year that I've been here, I've spoken to the grand jury twice. I want to continue to do that. It's important to me. I want them to know what we do, and I want to hear directly from them. So that is an ongoing partnership and relationship that's very important to this office, and I believe to the county. My dad was a civil grand juror in LA County, and I know about sort of his experiences and how valuable he found them. So I will continue to make the civil grand jury a priority. It's worth noting, Kathy and members of the league, that the criminal grand jury is not meeting right now. You can imagine having people assembled in a room for a long period of time is just not feasible given our public health emergency. But maybe perhaps in the future, hopefully not too long from now, we'll be able to resume the criminal grand jury.
Someone would like to know if you have interaction with other DAs from other counties, such as meetings or conferences.
Yeah, I do. And thanks for the question. There are 58 of us, and you want to kind of just draw on their knowledge, their experience, their resources. And most of us, not all, but the lion's share are part of an association called the California District Attorneys Association. And just Friday of last week, we had a noontime roundtable. And there were probably about 35, 36 DAs at that roundtable. And we talk about everything from, what are the bills in Sacramento that are impacting public safety? We talked a lot about recruitment and retention. It's very much an employee's market right now. We're seeing that it's difficult for certain offices to keep and even recruit new DAs, given this labor shortage. And just frankly, law firms can pay a heck of a lot more than government can. So there's a lot that goes on in the association that I find very beneficial.
That's great. How can we as voters gauge the effectiveness of your office?
Boy, that's a great question. Obviously, what you hear, what you see, and what you read. I am a news junkie. I like to read, the Acorn, the Star. I'll read, Vita for Spanish language, Pacific Coast Business Times. I kind of start locally and then I expand from there. Cal Matters, the LA Times. So kind of what you're reading and what you're hearing. And then also, I think one of the benchmarks is kind of you know, where are we in terms of making sure that we remain a fair and just county? And how do you measure that? I think you measure that by looking at, you know, our record, not only of convictions, but also looking at our record of cases that potentially are diverted to mental health court or mental health diversion. And also you look at who we're hiring, who is coming in, what's their background, you know, what kind of prosecutors are they? What type of investigators are now part of the Bureau? I didn't even talk about it. We have a Bureau that deals exclusively with fraud-based cases, child pornography cases. They deal with workers' compensation, consumer, environmental crimes. You know, they too need to be assessed in terms of their effectiveness. But I believe that this office has remained true to its core mission, and that we really are blessed here in Ventura County to have the resources to continue to serve the public and to hire some of the best attorneys and investigators in the state. You know, we're fortunate to be a coastal county, frankly. When we have a job opening, multiple people apply still, even in this labor shortage, and that results in some very qualified and very capable applicants.
So, Mr. Nasarenko, is some of this information on your website, for instance, about your diversity and how many cases are diverted and things like that? The sheriff last week spoke about a dashboard of kind of statistics that they have on their website. Do you have something similar, or how would we know this information except for combing the newspapers and such?
Yeah, I have a proposal for a dashboard right now, but I just need to string together the budget and frankly the time. You know, the short answer is, you know, have them reach out directly to me. We don't have a dashboard yet on our website. That's something that I'd like to do, but we just don't have in one place all of these metrics. So, you know, I just want to encourage anybody who's interested, email me directly. I can get that information to you. I mean, we have statistics on diversion. We have statistics on conviction rates. All of that is indeed available.
Well, thank you. That's great. One final question, and that is, will you have a statement in the voter information guide or on Voters Edge prior to the election?
Absolutely. You know, I've run for public office before, twice, in fact. In both instances, I did have a candidate statement. I just think it's, you know, a great way to communicate to voters about who you are and what you seek to achieve or have done. So the answer is yes.
Well, thank you. That's good to know. And thank you very much for sharing your time and talking about your office with us today. We really appreciate it. And I'm going to pass it back to Pat Malchuk for a few concluding remarks. Thanks again.
Thank you, Kathy.
Before we end our session today, we'd just like to ask you, is there anything you would like to add that we have not covered from our questions and our attendees' questions? Is there anything you think is important for us to know?
Oh, thank you. It was a comprehensive discussion. I was able to talk about a lot of different topics. You know, I feel like I give very sobering news and statistics, but I just want to end with one more that gives me pause, and I've talked a little bit about this. We're seeing more DUI-related fatalities in the pandemic. In fact, we had the highest number in 2021 in the last 10 years. Accompanying that is a rise in the number of reckless driving prosecutions. So, you know, part of my job is to build awareness, to educate, and also just to let people know what's going on in terms of crime trends. But I just think we all have to really understand that the pandemic has unleashed some multiplying dangers. And I talked about fentanyl, and I certainly see driving behavior and recklessness and those driving under impaired conditions as increasing. We'll continue to have the sobriety checkpoints. We'll continue to use resources from the state to fund our prosecutors. But this is something that I hope begins a downward trajectory rather than an upward one, because it gives me significant pause and concern.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you so much, District Attorney Nasarenko, for joining us today and helping us better understand the role and responsibilities of the Office of the County District Attorney. We really appreciate all the important information you did share with us and having the opportunity to meet you. And once again, we do respect your time and know how important this session is for everyone.
Thank you, Pat, and my thanks to the League of Women Voters. I look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you. Now I would like to remind everyone that next Wednesday, we will be meeting at the same time and place and hearing from County Clerk Registrar of Voters, Mark Lund. As a reminder, recordings of this session and all future ones will be available. Please go to the League of Women Voters website to access a link to the recording. Thanks to everyone for attending, and we look forward to seeing you all again next week. This concludes today's presentation.